All right, let's get started with this part of the stream. So today I will path parameters and numeric validations. Okay, so yeah, let me go through this step by step like I always do so that I can understand what path parameters and numeric validation is all about. But of course, we know what path parameters are, we know what query parameters are, we know how to do validation concerning query parameters using annotated, and we also know that we can use what's it called, query, okay, from FastAPI, and annotated from is it typing, okay, to help us do that. So let's just start reading paragraph by paragraph. So here they say, in the same way that you can declare more validations and metadata for query parameters with query, you can declare the same type of validations and metadata for path parameters with path. Okay, actually, we learned about this yesterday within the first few paragraphs that we read when we were studying about query parameters and validations. But those were actually, I think, were these string validations. But let's continue. Okay, we'll learn more. So they're saying the first thing to do is to import path. So they're saying first import path from FastAPI and import annotated. Of course, we expect to import annotated. Okay, annotated. And if you don't know what annotated does, you really read or watch the I think second or third stream. Okay, where we talked about annotations in Python. So the same from FastAPI import FastAPI path query. Okay, we know FastAPI, we know query. So one more has been introduced, which is path. And of course, we have an instance of FastAPI. We have a path decoration, a path operation decorator, then a path operation function. Okay, and here we see that items ID is a path variable. Okay, and it's right here. FastAPI is smart enough to give and inject this value for us. So we have here annotated, okay? And then inside annotated, we have int, of course. So ideally, item ID should be an integer. And if we give like an integer which is in quotes, meaning it's a string, FastAPI will convert it to an integer. And then just like we had query for query params, we have path, okay? So path is metadata added for path variables. Then query is metadata added for query parameters. And in this case, we're adding a title saying the ID of the item to get, okay? Then we have Q, also annotated, which is a string or none, and has a default value of none, okay? So it's optional, okay? And we see that query takes also some metadata, okay? In this case, it is giving an alias, meaning another name. Another name to refer to Q is item query. Okay, let's continue. Excuse me. So here it says we have a dictionary, okay, called results. Then if Q is present, if the query is present, then the dictionary is updated with Q, and finally results are returned. Okay, so pretty simple. Okay, nothing really magic about this. Simply, path is adding metadata to a path variable. Query is for adding metadata to a query parameter. Okay. So let's go on because our goal is to do numeric validations. That's what we want to see. So this title will simply just appear in the documentation. And of course, they have the other variants like for Python 3.9 plus, 3.8, and so on. So if you're working on these versions, please read this, but it's pretty much the same concept, same thing, but just different syntax with slight tweaks here and there. So let's go on. So you're saying FastAPI added support for annotated and started recommending it in version 0.95. We read about this yesterday. If you have an older version, you would get errors when trying to use annotated. So make sure you upgrade your FastAPI version to at least 0.95.1 before using annotated. Then we go on and they're going to start walking through us what is going on here. Okay. So the first thing, of course, they're saying is import path. Okay. So let's go for them step by step. Okay. Import path. I'll remove all this. Okay. And just paste that. We have path here imported. Okay. Not yet used. Then they say after that, declare metadata. So for a path variable to whom you want to add some information, first of all, import path. And then after that, declare your metadata. So they're saying you can declare all the same parameters as for query, which means things like, I would guess, title, alias, and other validations. So they're saying for example, to declare a title metadata value for the path parameter item ID, you can type, okay? So from typing, import annotated, then they import FastAPI, path, and query from FastAPI, an instance of FastAPI, a path operation decorator, a path operation function, and here we have the highlighted line, okay? And the metadata they're adding to this path variable is title, okay? Which is a parameter, okay, of path. So simply let's copy all this and paste. Nothing really complex here. Importing path, using path in annotated, and passing in a title to path. So when we continue, they have a note saying a path parameter is always required as it has to be part of the path. Even if you declare it with none or set a default value, it would not affect anything. It would always be required. So yeah, simply telling us once you use path, it's always has to be part of the path. Okay. So making it none or default value none changes absolutely nothing. Okay. So they're saying order the parameters as you need. So they said this is probably not as important or as necessary if you use annotated. Okay. So they're saying, let's say you want to declare the query parameter q as a required str string. And you don't need to declare anything else for that parameter. So you don't really need to use query. You want to declare a query parameter q as a required string. Okay. So ideally, yeah, you wouldn't need to use query because you just do something like so. You'd say q, okay? Q is a string, as simple as that. Okay. This would be a declaration in a function. So let me say if we had another async def, I call this read items 2, okay? Read items 2. If you can type faster, then you can have q, okay? And you simply say q is a string like that. So I'll leave it empty. This is what they mean, okay? There's no need for you to use query, okay? And in this case, it is simply a required string. Then they're saying, but you still need to use path for the item ID path parameter. And you don't want to use annotated for the same reason. Python will complain if you put a value with a default before a value that doesn't have a default. Okay, Python will complain if you put a value with a default. Okay, so q is equals to make that. So this is a default. And then before path var makes makes sense. The path var this is a query param. Okay, this is a path variable. Wait, looks like I misinterpreted something here. If you look closely, read this statement. I think I'm just tired. They say Python will complain if you put a default value before a value that doesn't have a default. Yeah, this is it. Problem of streaming when you're actually tired. Okay, so this is actually the expected behavior. You see this? Putting this before this, Python would complain. So the actual solution is the other way around. Wow. Sorry about that. Sorry for misleading you. So guys who only watched the previous mistake and probably went off, you won't see the correction. But I hope you really see. They're saying you can reorder them and have the value without a default. the query parameter first. Okay, so which is this one without a parameter first. So they're saying it doesn't matter for FastAPI. It will detect parameters by their names, types, and default decorations. Query, path, it doesn't care about order. So you can declare your function as, so they're saying prefer to use annotated version if possible. This is a tip, okay? So which is good. I'm sure that it's good to know that the order doesn't matter, okay? That's one more less bug to run into, and one bug we can easily avoid. So they're saying from FastAPI, import FastAPI and path. App equals to FastAPI, app.get, we have a path variable, then we have a query param, okay? Then we have a path variable coming next, okay? And that is it. And this works pretty much. So I can copy this, okay? So if I can quickly look for this other previous one so that we see the difference, I want to really understand this. I'm starting to see how easily I can get lost. So if I come down here and I paste this, okay, let me simply, so because of becoming lazy, I'm even finding it hard to simply type from typing import annotated, okay. So you see, maybe let me also import query just to remove that squiggly line. So you see here, query Q came first, but here item ID came first, then Q came second. So they're saying the order does not matter. Why? FastAPI is smart enough to identify what is a query parameter, what is a path, and what is a query parameter. Okay. So yeah, awesome. This is really good to know. So let's continue. Where was I? Okay. Yeah, so we're reading this. It says, but keep in mind that if you use annotated, you won't have this problem. It won't matter as you are not using the function parameter default values for query of path. Okay, so what they are saying, it is recommended to use their tools, which is annotated. Let me first check something here. All right, let's continue. So they're saying from typing import annotated, from FastAPI import FastAPI and path, FastAPI instance, a path operation decorator with the path variable item ID, and you can see it's here and annotated as int with metadata path, which has title. Okay. So let us see. Yeah, that is it. Same thing we saw up there. Parameters as you need. Tricks. So they're saying here's a small trick that can be handy, but you won't need it often. If you want to declare the Q parameter without a query or any default value. Okay. So you have Q, okay. For example, this, which is a query, without using query, no default value, declare the path parameter item ID using path, have them in a different order, and not use annotated. They're saying Python has a little special syntax for this. So they're saying pass the asterisk as the first parameter of the function. Okay, so which is this? Then they're saying Python won't do anything with that asterisk, but it will know that all the following parameters should be called as keyword arguments. Okay, and of course, by the time we are learning FastAPI, I should be knowing what keyword arguments are, okay? Or the key value pairs known as quags. So every Python developer should know quags and args, okay? So they're saying even if they don't have a default value, okay? So the asterisk doesn't do anything, but simply they know that all that comes after this should be key value pairs, even if they don't have a value. So the conditions are here. You want to declare Q as a parameter without query. So we have here Q, okay, is a parameter and we're not using query, no metadata for it. In addition to that, yeah, no query, without query and default value. So you see, for this query parameter Q, We have not used query, and that means we don't need to use annotated, and there's no default value. Then declare a path parameter item ID using path. Okay, item ID, and we have used path. Okay, but not annotated. Take note of that. Have them in a different order and not use annotated. Okay, they say use this asterisk. Yeah, this is nice. This is nice and good to know. But they're saying, what is the statement? They say, but you won't need it often. Take note of that. So let's not get, I was actually getting excited. Okay. So let me say, they say better with annotated. They say, keep in mind that if you use annotated, as you are not using function parameter default values, you won't have this problem and you probably won't need to use asterisks. Keep in mind, if you use annotated, as you are not using function parameter default values, you won't have this problem and you probably won't use the asterisks. Okay, let me try to think about this statement. Okay, so let us see the highlighted line of code. They have item ID, annotated, int, and a path. Okay, and of course, if by the time you're watching this, if this does not make sense to you, make sure you watch our previous streams or simply go to documentation and read it for yourself. So yeah, I think that's it. Pretty cool. Okay. Yeah, I think I now get it. So they're saying as long as we're not using default values, okay, like this one has no default value, this one has no default value. Okay, we don't need to use the asterisks. Okay, so let's continue. Saying number validations greater than or equal. Finally, they're bringing us here. So you're saying with query and path and others, you'll see later, you can declare number constraints. Here with GE equals to 1, item ID will need to be an integer greater than or equal to 1. So G for greater and E for equal. Where is it? Okay, we see that the path variable. Okay, so we see the metadata. The first one is the title. Okay, and then the GE, meaning should be greater than or equal to 1. Yeah, it's time to prove this. So I'll copy, erase that, save, run, and of course, launch our server. Localhost / items. Say not found. Okay, items / 2. Okay, so you see, it is they say Q is required. We have to pass Q. Okay, let me make this bigger so that you can see it. Say to Q question mark equals to data. So you say message input should be a valid integer, unable to pass string as integer. Okay, so we need item ID to be okay. So you see the mistake I've done. I have to put the question mark after the 2 like that. So here we go, it works. If I turn this 2 to a 0, we get that validation saying input should be greater than or equal to 1. Pretty simple, pretty easy. So yeah, it's cool. Let me continue. They say number validations greater than and less than or equal. So you're saying the same applies for GT greater than, okay, or equal. LE less than or equal. So the G for greater, the T for than, the L for less, the E for equal. So yeah, pretty much the same idea. So if I needed this, I'll just simply come and change the GE to LE, meaning less than, okay? Or I put the GT, meaning greater than, okay? Or the LT, which I guess will be less than. Wait, and I've not seen it here, but I'm just making a quick guess. So I hope I'm right. Okay, and of course you can try this. So they're saying number validations, floats, greater than and less than. Number validations also work for float values. Here is what it becomes, well, here is where it becomes important to be able to declare GT, not as GE. As with each, you can require, for example, a value that must be greater than 0, even if it is less than 1. Something greater than 0, even if it is less than 1. So they're saying, so 0.5 would be a valid value, but 0.000 would not. Yeah, so yeah, be careful between greater than and not just greater than or equal. Okay. Yeah. You want something to be greater. So if you see, like, for example, 0.5, okay, is greater than 0, but less than 1. But 0.000 is not greater than 0. But if you use G, it will be equal. Okay, so the same applies to LT. That's what they're just trying to tell us, which is less than. And I guess then I was right, okay, when trying out this here. So let me continue. So you see they have that trick by passing the asterisk, meaning every other parameter here will be now a quag, okay, meaning key value pairs. And then we have an integer metadata title equals to this is the title, okay, for documentation, and then some constraints, okay. So item ID should be greater or equals to 0, but it should be less than or equals to 1000. Then you have Q, which is a must, okay. Then you have size, another query parameter, which is annotated, a float, okay. I think it should be greater or equals to 0, but less than or equal to 10.5. No, it should be greater than 0 and less than 10.5. Yeah, not greater or equal, or not less or equal, but greater than and less than. Yeah, so greater than is different from greater than or equal, and less than is different from less than or equal. So maybe quickly to test this. So yeah, we have to pass the item ID, Q, and size. So let me try that. See, message field missing, size and query. And of course, when we come here, we see that we have size. Okay, size missing. So comma, not comma, but and size equals to, if I put 12.5, input should be less than 10.5. Okay, so if I put like 10.5 itself, it fails. Okay, because it shall be supposed to be less. If I put 9.5, okay, we get it perfectly well and okay. So if I come back here and let me see, I want to manipulate something. Maybe this one. Okay, let's try for item ID by passing something like 2000. Let's see. We come here and say the path is going to be 2000. Hit enter. You see, we get the message saying input should be less than or equal to 1000. So if I put, come on, change this 2 to 1, you see, it passes. Yeah. I think FastAPI is fairly easy. I don't know whether it's just me, but I've not yet found something very hard to understand. It's been smooth. Oh, looks like we're at the end. So we have a recap saying with query and path and others, you haven't seen yet, you can declare metadata and string validations in the same way with query parameters and string validations. Isn't that good to know? I think it is. Then they say you can also declare numeric validations. Okay. Numeric validations. GT greater than, GE greater than or equal, LT less than, LE less than or equal. Then we have some information saying query, path, and other classes you will see later are subclasses of a common param class. All of them share the same parameters for additional validation and metadata you have seen. Okay. When you see subclasses, then you know, of course, we're dealing with OOP. And this is they're just applying inheritance. So I guess they're trying to say from this, I think if you want maybe to build actually your own custom kind of thing, if I inherited param, probably I could, but then let me not make guesses. Because if query and path inherit from this, maybe I can build my own kind of stuff to add metadata, but let me not hallucinate like some random LLM, okay? Let me stick to learning. So we have here technical details. They say when you import query and query path and others from FastAPI, they are actually functions. And of course, I agree. And of course, any Python developer who understands OOP functions, yeah, this makes sense. That when called, return instances of classes of the same name. Yes. So you import query, which is a function, and when you call it, it returns an instance of a class also named query. That's correct. Okay. That's very correct. Okay. Query is simply a function but when you run it, okay, you get an instance of its class called query. So query is when you do this is an instance of the class query. This one is an instance of the class path. Simple as that. Just like this is also an instance. These functions are there instead of just using the classes directly so that your editor doesn't mark errors about their types. Yeah, I think now, yeah. I can't say this is obvious, but it's a good thing to mention as a technical detail that these functions are there. And instead of using the classes directly, our editors doesn't make errors about their types. So they're saying that way you can use your normal editor and coding tools without having to add custom configurations to disregard those errors. Thank you, FastAPI team. I appreciate. Yeah, so another day, I've learned something. Okay. Yeah, I've enjoyed short but sweet and yeah, more knowledge added. And yeah, it's been nice. It's been nice. So yeah, I'll be ending this in the next stream, which will be next week. I'll go on to even something new. Okay. Query parameters. Yeah, it's interesting how just learning something small day by day. So we look at query parameter models, not query parameters, parameter models. So do that step by step. Okay. Before you know it, I will be at the bottom here. And I can't wait for that day to reach. So yeah, let me end the stream and I'll have more learning experience next week. Bye-bye.